Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. A closer look at agriculture in South Carolina and conversations between the current and future leaders of agriculture in the Palmetto State and experts from across America. Presented by the students of the South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Howe. From our campus in McCormick County, here's our moderator, Dell Brockman.
Welcome to this edition of Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. I am Dell Brockman, and today we are joined by the host of TrueSouth on the SEC Network and ESPN, a show that visits towns and cities across the South and spotlights the fine examples of Southern food culture found there. The 5th season of TrueSouth premieres this week. He has won 4 James Beard Awards, the highest honor in the American culinary world, for his writing on Southern food. He is the founding director of the Southern Foodways Alliance at the University of Mississippi, which studies Southern food traditions, and he's a frequent contributor to Garden and Gun magazine and has written or edited more than a dozen books. My guest, John T. Edge. Mr. Edge, welcome to Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water.
I'm so happy to be with you today. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. We are honored to have you on the show today. I guess my first question, I'm going to get right into it. My first question is, why is TrueSouth on the SEC Network and not another food network or like Discovery Channel or anything?
Yeah. I mean, we're right where we want to be. This is a show about the South, and sure, we use food as a way of getting to the subjects we want to address, but it's really not a food show. Like, I don't want it to land in the Food Network. I want to talk to Southerners. I want to talk to a broad swath of Southerners. I want to talk to people with different political beliefs, different social beliefs, people of different religions. I don't want to just talk to food obsessives. I want to talk to people who are trying to figure out the South. And the SEC Network delivers us that audience, and I love it.
So you're in it for the culture, not for the food, or is it both?
I'm a little bit of both, but I'm more interested in the people and their stories than I am how crunchy the fried chicken is. I don't belong on the Food Network.
Yeah. So I watched a few of your shows and a big fan now. I enjoy them.
Thank you.
And but you visit all these different places and these different cultures. And what would you say would be your favorite one? Your favorite city you visited?
Oh wow, there's so many. I have to say the city that I keep thinking about is Shreveport, Louisiana. Shreveport was a part of our first season. It was the final show of our first season. And the show there revolves around 2 restaurants, one called Herbie K's. That's an old Italian-owned joint down by what used to be the railroad tracks, now hard by a concrete overpass. And then the second restaurant's called Lucky Palace, and it's right by the interstate across the river in Bossier City from Shreveport. And they're both joints. They're places that are unassuming. They're places that have kind of stood the test of time, and they're places that have faced down loss and endured. And I especially think about Lucky Palace in that way. The owner of that restaurant, Quan Lim, died just over a year ago. And when we made our show, Lim was fighting cancer. And a year after we made our show, Lim lost his battle with cancer. And we make a food show, and I was attracted to that place, Lucky Palace in Bossier City, because he did. The restaurant's still open, but Lim has passed. These amazing wok cooked T-bones with ginger and jalapeno, these great fried prawns in this lacy batter, duck cooked, roasted slathered with hoisin sauce and rolled in little pancakes. It was great food with an amazing wine list. But that restaurant mattered more as a place to commune with Lim, this big-hearted guy with this goofy snaggletooth grin, a Malaysian immigrant who found his place in Bossier City. And if I could turn back time, that's the place I'd go. I'd go there and sit with Lim at that table in Lucky Palace and drink beautiful Burgundies and just revel in his company. He's just an amazing guy, and I'd love to be back there right now.
Oh, yeah. So when you go to all these cities and these restaurants, you really do meet the culture, and you meet the people, and you make connections with them. Just by hearing that little spill on him, I can tell that you actually spent your time and you care about the communities you visit.
I do. I mean, the people we meet trust us to help tell their story, and that's a sacred trust. Like, I feel so lucky to get to do this work, to get to make this show. Like, I'm just a dude in an office at the University of Mississippi. I shouldn't have a television show. Like, it's bonkers that I have a television show. And as long as I continue to remember that, I'm going to be okay. As long as I can, every time we set out to make a show, we can bring an honest humility to the making of that show and a love for the South to that show, we're going to be okay. And we're going to learn something about people who are different from us, which is one of the things I set out to do. We're going to show empathy and hopefully encourage empathy in others. And food's the way we get there, but the work hopefully is more than that. So thanks for saying that. I appreciate it.
No problem. So a big thing right now is the farm to table saying in restaurants and cultures around the South. And what does that mean to you? What does the farm to table saying mean to you?
I mean, it's a catchphrase, right? Like, it's something you hear people using to describe, they want to cook food that has its roots in the farm as opposed to, roots in a industrial operation, as opposed to roots in an industrial pork operation or industrial beef operation or some entity that produces food that we distrust. But I think that term farm to table is kind of overused now. I wonder if what we're really trying to say is, we want to cook and eat food that's honest. We want to cook and eat food from farmers we trust. We want to be able to trace the food we eat back to the farm where it was grown. And all those things are important to do. But I'm not I believe in farm to table connections, but I'm more interested in people to people connections. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. So I was thinking about it, and I do agree with you. It is a little overdone, and I like how you put it, is how it's important to eat real food, and like, it's not just the food, though, it's the connections you make, and it's not just a big old factory. Yeah. It's like the connections you make, the small ones with the farmers, and you get to go the whole way through and understand what's actually going on.
That's right. How do you get beyond language to actually figure out what's going on? And, you see, fast food chains now marketing their artisanal this and their farm to table that. And where does the truth lie?
Well, I have another question for you. How did you get on the TrueSouth show? Like, how was that brought up?
So our executive producer, Wright Thompson, and I live about 8 blocks apart, and we've been buddies for a while. And we were having lunch one day at a place called Handy Andy that's not far from my house, but even closer to Wright's. And we were eating cheeseburgers and French fries and talking about our want to make a television show. Our belief that maybe, because I've been traveling the South for just about 30 years now as a writer, and Wright's been doing it for around 20, that we had enough ego, and maybe a little too much ego, to say, like, we could make a show. We could try to get this place right. And we know enough good restaurants, and we got enough connections. Like, maybe we can pull it off. So I came home from that lunch and wrote out like a 2-page summary of what our show could be. And then, because Wright is a longtime writer for ESPN, he had the connections to ask the question, could our Flight of Fancy work? And sure enough, they let us take a chance. They took a big chance on us because none of us had made a television show before. We taught ourselves how to make a television show while we were making it. First episode in 2018. So to make a short answer to your question, how did we get here? We got lucky. SEC Network took a chance on us, and we're greatly indebted to Greg Sankey and the crew at the conference, and to Rosalind Durant, who, as president of the network at that point, took a chance on us and said, maybe they can pull this off. That's a heck of a thing to do, to trust two goofy boys with something so, like, give us the keys to a really fast car and think, maybe they can drive it.
Well, I know you were the host of TrueSouth, but I also see that you've won multiple James Beard Awards, and you've written on Southern food. You help a magazine, Gardening Gun, and you even wrote a few books. So, would you consider yourself a writer or more of a TV star?
I don't consider myself any kind of star. It's just, I'm a writer who now gets to make a TV show. And I'm a teacher who now gets to make a TV show. The TV show is a natural outgrowth of all this stuff I've been doing for 20 plus years. It's the same instincts. It's like, where's the story lay within the larger landscape? What details add up to a narrative? It's learning to look, to pay attention, and find a story that other people miss. Like, that's the gig. And I feel like I'm a writer who now gets to make a TV show, and I'm thankful for that, because you do reach a lot more people with a television show. There's no doubt about it. And I feel like I've begun a conversation now with a whole new kind of group of Southerners that I didn't know before. And I feel fortunate to be in that conversation.
Well, a question on my mind is, you talk all this food talk and you eat at all these places, but can you cook?
I can. I'm not as good a cook as my wife. My wife is as good a cook as I know, professional chefs included. On this Tuesday, we'll have the new season of TrueSouth starts with an episode in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and one of the places is a really amazing pizza place. And so Blair is making pizza for our party. We'll, like a little small party, we'll throw in Oxford to celebrate it. So it's all to say, like, she's the great cook in our family. But I'm a pretty good cook. Last thing I made, I was really proud of. I made a chicken and sausage jambalaya that I liked. Didn't turn out too bad. My wife slept in Saturday morning. I made a scrambled eggs with the onions. Like, I poached the onions basically in butter and then folded it in eggs and cooked them really lightly, and made breakfast tacos out of those with some Benton Allen's bacon. And that's combining two shows. So the other restaurant in our Hot Springs episode is a place called the Pancake Shop. that served scrambled eggs with onions, and I loved them. And it's like, okay, I can try this at home. And then last season we made an episode about Alan and Sharon Benton of Benton's Smoky Mountain Country Hams up in Madisonville, Tennessee. So cooking that breakfast for my wife on Saturday morning, those soft scrambled eggs with onions that Alan Benton's baking, and we rolled them in tortillas. A friend of ours who was a guy named Dave Tell, who was in town visiting, brought some tortillas made with duck fat from a place in Lawrence, Kansas, and it was great. But it's not fancy cooking; it's ingredients. It's ingredient centered cooking. It's everyday cooking. I'm not a fancy cook, but I'm a pretty good cook.
So in your travels, you seem to like pick up on these things, and you seem to take them back, like where you live, and bring sort of the culture with you. You think that's important to go out of where you're from and get new experiences and new cultures involved with your own?
I do. I mean, that's part of what restaurants offer us. You cross the transom into a restaurant, you walk in the door of a restaurant, and you enter a new world. And that can be, it could be, I remember when I lived in Atlanta, I loved going to Ethiopian restaurants, and I learned what injera was, the thin, spongy bread, and I learned what a wat was as a stew, and I learned that okra and black-eyed peas and other things that show up in the American South also show up in Ethiopian cooking. So food has long expanded my horizons and expanded my knowledge base. And I think it can do that for all if we open our eyes and open up our palate. Our challenge as humans is to engage the world, to be open, to both open our hearts and our heads to humanity, to be empathetic, to be empathy machines. And I think food is one way to start doing that.
So if I'm not mistaken, doesn't your wife star in a show that's based in South Carolina?
No. You mean in our show? In our show, I thought you were saying like she's her own.
No, yeah, I meant your show. My bad.
So yeah, no. You asked the question well. I was just a goofball. I just missed it. So yeah, we made a show ostensibly about my mother and the catfish stew my mother cooked, and it's about, in many ways, my complicated relationship with my mother. It's also about the way my wife has carried on some of my mother's cooking traditions via catfish stew that originated in Bowman, South Carolina, which is where my mother was born and now she's buried. For kind of our family recipe, the one we serve for company, the one we serve for occasions, is that catfish stew cooked by her father, my grandfather, Jesse Clifton Evans Edge, the same person we named our son for. So that's our son's name, Jesse Clifton Evans Edge. My grandfather was Jesse Clifton Evans. So it all starts with that catfish stew. And yes, Blair gets a good bit of screen time in that episode, that Bowman, South Carolina episode, cooking that catfish stew.
Yeah. That show was that episode was a very emotional and a very personal one, and it was great to see a more of a personal side to how that can make someone feel, and just the culture as a whole, and how.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was done. But another thing I have to say is I saw your 4 James Beard Awards. Can you kind of explain to me what that is? Because I never heard of it before I started doing the research.
Sure. Say that again. I missed you for a second. What'd you say?
Can you explain to me what the James Beard Awards are?
Sure. So the James Beard Awards are a system of awards that goes out to people in the food world, chefs, artisans, distillers, and others who work in the world of food. There's a a particular track of the Beard Awards that focuses on journalism and on media makers. So I've won 3 James Beard Awards, and some people refer to them as the Oscars of the food world. I don't know if that's necessarily so, but they have long signified kind of excellence in the world of food. And so I'm happy to have won 3 for my journalism, and 3 for my writing, and then another one is a kind of lifetime achievement. I think it's Who's Who Award is what they call it. So it's important when your peers honor you. That's an important signifier. It matters, and those awards mattered to me in that moment.
Well, they seem to be pretty big awards. Why is music such a big part of True South?
Well, if you think about products of the South that tell a story of the South, food and music are 2 of our greatest exports. The things we make here and then sell to the world, broadcast to the world. Music, like food, tells a story of where we come from, who we are, where we're going. And you think about the exports that the South has sent out in the world: blues from the Mississippi Delta, gospel, jazz, bluegrass from Kentucky. Like, all these different American art forms originated in the American South and are now global phenomena, just like our food. So if you want to tell a story of the South, you lean into those exports, you lean into those things we do well. And I'd argue that our greatest products and exports are food and music, literature too. And then we got some exports that I'm less proud of, but
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about your books? I saw your apple pie and your fried chicken books, and I was kind of wondering about those.
Yeah, so those books, I wrote a quartet, a series of 4 books about iconic American foods, and the first one was on hamburgers, second one on fried chicken, or maybe the first one was fried. I think the first one was fried chicken. Then it was apple pie. Then it was hamburgers. Then it was donuts. The basic 4 food groups. But in the same way, like, I see those foods as kind of totems of identity. They say who we are as Americans, and they vary greatly as you travel across the South and across the nation. So for that series of books, I traveled all across. I went to Hawaii for donuts, Seattle for fried chicken, New York State for fried chicken, Boston for donuts, Massachusetts for apple pies. Travel the whole country looking at the foods that define us, and what we cook, why we cook them, what are the stories of those dishes, what are the stories of the people who created them. That I wrote that series. It's been more than 20 years. Those started coming out in, I think, 2001, 2002. So 20 plus years ago. You dug deep into the history vault there.
Yeah, I'm gonna go give those a read. But you were also a professor at I think the University of Ole Miss maybe.
Yeah, so I teach at the University of Georgia and the University of Mississippi.
So how do your students react that you have your own TV show on ESPN?
I mean, my students, I wouldn't say they don't care, because they do, but it's not a big part of our everyday interaction. We're in a classroom talking about how to get better at writing, and I'm editing their papers and offering them insights. I don't, I've got a class now and teaching in the writing and rhetoric department here at the University of Mississippi, and I don't know if my 8 students who are in that class, I don't know how many of them have actually seen the show. They don't need to. It's another part of my brain, another part of my life in which I teach, I make media, I do think that it is important for somebody who teaches to continue to be a creator, a maker in the field in which they teach. So, the work I do making that TV show, the work I do writing a column for Garden and Gun or writing a book, certainly is translatable in the classroom. It's just not primary in the classroom.
Well, do you think the agriculture in the South is the future of the South?
I think it is one future, yes. I mean, we're always going to need to feed ourselves. And some kind of fusion of technological advances and a kind of renewed commitment to stewardship of the land. Those two things in complement can spell a better future for us. But in my opinion, it's not solely a return to the land, a return to the ways of our grandparents or great-grandparents, or solely a focus upon technological innovation, but some fusion of those two that looks like our future for agriculture.
Do you like to hang out with farmers, and like when you're on the show, do you hang out with people that grow the food?
We do. I mean, I can think back about our Hodgenville, Kentucky episode when we gathered in a barn and talked to farmers from that area about the changing crops in that area. At one point, that was a big tobacco growing region. Before that, they were growing hemp. Now they're growing corn and making whiskey. And more recently, cannabis is becoming another crop in that area of Kentucky. So, yeah, agriculture is always there for us. I think it becomes more a focal point when we're in small towns where farms are close at hand.
Well, I appreciate you being on this show, and I'm honored to be able to talk to you about this. And thank you for tuning into this episode of Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. I am Dell Brockman, and please join us next week for another conversation about agriculture here at the Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Salle. Thank you.
Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. A closer look at agriculture in South Carolina and conversations between the current and future leaders of agriculture in the Palmetto State and experts from across America. Presented by the students of the South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Salle. For more information on the South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture, visit our website at delahal.sc.gov.